Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched the last human transport ship disappear into hyperspace. The massive cargo vessel had just finished loading the final equipment for Research Station Beta 7. Now the station floated empty in the darkness between stars, its lights still on, but no one left inside. Lisa Parker walked up beside him and checked her tablet. "That was the last one, Captain," she said quietly. "All human personnel have been evacuated from this sector." Jake nodded, but said nothing. He had been doing this job for 3 months now, overseeing the complete withdrawal of humanity from Galactic Council space. Station after station, base after base, research facility after research facility. All of them left clean and functional, but empty of human presence. Ryan Davis turned from his communication station. "Sir, we're getting another message from Council Command. They want to know when we're coming back." "Same answer as before," Jake replied. "Tell them we're following our new orders." Ryan hesitated. "They're asking what those orders are." Jake looked out at the empty station. "Tell them the orders are classified." It was not really a lie. The orders were classified, even from most humans. Jake knew only what he needed to know. All humans were leaving Council space. No exceptions. No explanations. No negotiations. 3 months ago, the order had come down from Earth Command. Every human in Council territory was to pack up and leave within 90 days. Military personnel, scientists, diplomats, traders, settlers, everyone. The evacuation had been planned with military precision. Ships arrived exactly when needed. Personnel were transferred in perfect order. Equipment was removed down to the last screwdriver. The other species in the Council had been confused at first, then worried, then angry. But humans had simply continued packing and leaving without offering any explanations. When Council representatives demanded meetings, human ambassadors politely declined. When they sent messages, humans responded with short, official statements about policy changes and new priorities. Jake remembered the emergency council session from 2 weeks ago. He had watched the recording later. Ambassador Krell of the Fakari had stood up and declared that humanity was throwing a childish tantrum. The blue-skinned diplomat had several rows of sharp teeth that he showed when he was angry, and he had been very angry that day. "Humans always do this," Krell had said to the assembled representatives. "When they don't get their way, they storm off like spoiled children. Let them go. We will be better off without their constant interference and their ridiculous safety protocols." Chairman Vex had been more diplomatic, but equally dismissive. The tall crystalline being had spoken in his usual calm tone about how the Council would adapt and move forward. He suggested that humanity's departure might actually improve efficiency by removing what he called unnecessary complications from Council operations. Other representatives had nodded in agreement. The Corvin delegate had mentioned how human medical teams always insisted on extra quarantine procedures that slowed down trade. The Centauri representative had complained about human engineers who refused to approve construction projects without extensive safety studies. None of them seemed to understand that humans were not coming back. Jake had served in the end Council military for 15 years. He had fought beside alien soldiers and saved alien worlds. He had friends among the Fakari guards and drinking buddies among the Corvin pilots. But when the evacuation order came, those friendships had meant nothing. Orders were orders. Strangest part was how complete the withdrawal had been. Jake had expected at least some humans to refuse to leave. Some were married to aliens. Others had built entire lives in Council space. Some had been born on alien worlds and had never even seen Earth. But every single human had packed up and left without complaint. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had been the hardest case to watch. She had spent 20 years on the Joint Research Station Kepler-7, working alongside alien scientists to develop new medical treatments. Her lab had produced cures for 3 major diseases and breakthrough treatments for genetic disorders that affected multiple species. When the evacuation order came, Amy had systematically erased every piece of human research from the station computers. Her alien colleagues had begged her to leave the data behind. They had promised to continue her work and share any discoveries. But Amy had just smiled sadly and deleted everything. "I'm sorry," she had told Dr. Vorth, the senior Zentari researcher. "But this research belongs to humanity. We developed it. We own it, and we're taking it with us." The alien scientists had been devastated. Amy's team had been responsible for 60% of the station's breakthrough discoveries. Without access to human research methods and databases, the remaining scientists could barely maintain their current projects, much less develop new ones. The same scene had played out across the galaxy. Human engineers had removed their specialized equipment and deleted their design files. Human doctors had taken their medical scanners and wiped their patient databases. Human traders had canceled their contracts and recalled their ships. Human diplomats had cleaned out their offices and shipped their files back to Earth. Jake's own ship was a perfect example. The New Horizon had been built as a joint project between human and Corvan shipyards. But the key systems had all been designed by humans. The navigation computer used human algorithms. The power distribution system relied on human engineering principles. The life support systems had been optimized by human environmental specialists. When Jake's orders came through, he had been required to remove or disable every piece of uniquely human technology on the ship. The Corvan engineers who came aboard to take inventory had been shocked to discover that almost 70% of their joint vessel was actually human in origin. Lisa finished her final equipment check and looked up from her tablet. "All human. Technology has been removed or disabled, Captain. The station is now running on basic council systems only." Jake could see the difference immediately. The lights were dimmer because the human-designed power efficiency upgrades had been removed. The artificial gravity felt slightly unsteady because the human stabilization systems were gone. Even the air smelled different because the advanced filtration systems had been taken out. "How long before the station becomes uninhabitable?" Jake asked. Lisa checked her calculations. "The basic life support will last maybe 6 months. After that, they'll need to evacuate or find replacement parts for the systems we removed." Jake nodded. It was the same story everywhere. Humans had been so thoroughly integrated into council technology that their departure left gaping holes in even the most basic systems. The aliens were only now discovering how dependent they had become on human expertise. Ryan turned from his station again. "Captain, I'm getting reports from the other evacuation ships. The last human personnel have left council space. We're officially the final human presence in this sector." Jake took one last look at the empty research station. Somewhere in there, alien scientists were probably trying to figure out how to operate equipment they had used for years, but never truly understood. The irony was not lost on him. The Council had spent decades treating humans as junior partners, as useful but not essential members of galactic civilization. Now they were about to learn exactly how essential humans had been. "Set course for the rendezvous point," Jake ordered. "It's time to go home." The New Horizon turned away from the station and accelerated toward the edge of Council space. Behind them, the lights of Research Station Beta 7 grew smaller and dimmer until they disappeared entirely into the cosmic dark. Jake had been told that this was not the end of the story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter. Humanity was not giving up on the galaxy. They were simply changing their approach to dealing with ungrateful allies who had taken their help for granted. The silence of their departure would speak louder than any angry words or dramatic threats. Soon enough, the Council would understand what they had lost when they decided that humans were expendable. But by then, Jake knew it would be far too late to change anything. Dr. Vorth stared at the data screen in growing panic. The Corvin plague had appeared 6 months after the last human left Council space, and it was spreading faster than anything he had ever seen. The synthetic virus attacked the nervous systems of multiple species simultaneously, something that should have been impossible according to everything he knew about biology. 3 weeks ago, the first cases had appeared on a remote mining station in the Outer Rim. Within days, the infection had spread to 6 different worlds. Now it was racing through the major trade routes like wildfire, and the Council medical teams had no idea how to stop it. Vorth pulled up the emergency protocols that Dr. Elena Williams had developed during her time as head of interspecies medical research. Elena had been one of the most brilliant doctors in the galaxy, and her universal treatment protocols had saved millions of lives over the years. But when the humans left, Elena had taken all her research with her. Zentari scientist tried to reconstruct Alana's work from the limited notes that remained in the public databases. But the human doctor had been careful to remove all the crucial details. The protocols mentioned something called adaptive synthesis inhibitors and multi-species immune cascade prevention, but Vorth had no idea what those terms actually meant. Rigel Station, the situation was becoming desperate. Commander Zeth of the station security force watched helplessly as his crew collapsed one by one. The plague attacked Corvin physiology differently than it attacked other species, causing violent seizures followed by complete nervous system shutdown. Zeth remembered Captain Nick Foster, the human military advisor who had served on Rigel Station for 5 years. Nick had always insisted on maintaining extensive medical supplies and emergency protocols that most aliens considered unnecessary. The humans had seemed paranoid about biological threats, constantly running drills and updating quarantine procedures. Now, Zeth realized that Nick had not been paranoid at all. He had been prepared. The human-designed medical bay had been stripped of all its advanced equipment when the evacuation happened. The remaining facilities could barely handle routine injuries, much less a galaxy-wide pandemic. Zeth found himself staring at empty equipment racks where Nick's medical scanners used to be, wondering how many lives those machines could have saved. The economic impact was becoming just as severe as the medical crisis. Without human merchant vessels and their advanced navigation systems, trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades were falling apart. Captain Ben Taylor had revolutionized interstellar commerce with his breakthrough calculations that reduced hyperspace travel time by almost half. Ben's navigation algorithms had been installed on thousands of ships across the galaxy. But when the humans left, they had remotely disabled all their proprietary technology. Now cargo vessels that used to make the journey from Zentara Prime to the Outer Rim in 3 days were taking a full week. Ships were arriving late or not at all. Supply chains were collapsing. On the trading world of Nexus Point, merchant Prince Kelvuk watched his profit margins disappear as shipping costs doubled and then tripled. The Thraxian trader had complained loudly about human interference in free trade, particularly their insistence on safety inspections and route optimization studies that delayed cargo shipments. Now, Kelvuk would have given anything to have those interfering humans back. His warehouses were full of goods that could not be shipped efficiently. His contracts were being canceled as delivery times became unpredictable. Entire sectors of the economy were grinding to a halt without the transportation network that humans had quietly maintained. The infrastructure problems were even worse. On Council Station Alpha, Chief Engineer Torvin faced a crisis that was completely beyond his expertise. The massive orbital facility housed the Council government and served as the administrative center for the entire galaxy. But the station's critical systems had been designed and maintained by human engineers for over 30 years. Carlos Martinez had been the senior maintenance chief until the evacuation. The human engineer had left behind detailed instruction manuals for all the major systems. But Torvin was discovering that the manuals assumed a level of technical knowledge that his team simply did not possess. The power distribution grid was failing in sections. The human-designed fusion reactors required precise calibration procedures that no remaining engineer understood. The water recycling systems were producing contaminated output because the alien technicians could not properly maintain the molecular filters that Carlos had installed. Worst of all, the artificial gravity generators were becoming unstable. Carlos had warned that the generators needed specialized maintenance every 6 months, but he had never trained anyone else to perform the procedures. Now the gravity was fluctuating randomly throughout the station, causing injuries and equipment. Damaged Ambassador Krell found himself floating in zero gravity in his office when the gravity failed completely in the diplomatic section. The proud Thakari had to be rescued by maintenance workers who used emergency magnetic boots to reach him. As he was pulled to safety, Krell remembered the countless times he had dismissed human safety protocols as excessive and unnecessary. Chairman Vex called an emergency council session to address the mounting crisis. But without human administrators and their efficient meeting protocols, the session devolved into chaos. Different species had different ideas about how to prioritize the problems. The Corvin wanted to focus on the medical crisis. The Zentari demanded immediate action on the infrastructure failures. The Thakari insisted that restoring trade routes was the highest priority. In the past, human diplomats had somehow managed to find solutions that satisfied everyone. Dr. Patricia Stone had been particularly skilled at identifying common ground and building consensus among the quarreling species. But Patricia was gone, along with all her mediation techniques and compromise strategies. The council session lasted for 3 days without reaching any meaningful decisions. Representatives gave long speeches about their species' particular needs while ignoring the bigger picture. The elegant committee structures that had emerged naturally when humans were involved had completely broken down. On the medical front, the situation was becoming catastrophic. The Corvin plague had reached the core worlds, and the death toll was climbing rapidly. Dr. Vorth had managed to develop a partial treatment that slowed the progression of the disease in some species, but it was completely ineffective against the strain that attacked Zentari physiology. Helena Williams had published papers about viral adaptation patterns and multi-species immune responses, but her published work only covered the basic principles. All the practical applications and specific treatment protocols had been classified as proprietary human research. Without access to Helena's complete database, the remaining scientists were essentially working blind. The psychological impact was perhaps the most devastating of all. Species that had considered themselves the equals of humanity were discovering that they had been dependent clients all along. The humans had managed critical systems, solved complex problems, and prevented disasters so smoothly that their contributions had become invisible. Now their absence was like a giant hole in the fabric of galactic civilization. Every day brought new crises that would have been routine problems when humans were around to handle them. Equipment failed without proper maintenance. Diseases spread without effective treatments. Trade ground to a halt without efficient logistics. Ambassador Krell sat in his damaged office and tried to compose a message to Earth Command. He had sent dozens of such messages over the past months, asking for explanations, demanding negotiations, pleading for assistance. All of them had received the same brief response. Humanity is pursuing new priorities and is not available for consultation regarding council affairs. The messages were not even insulting or angry. They were worse than that. They were polite and completely indifferent. as if the council had become irrelevant to human concerns. Krell was beginning to suspect that humanity had planned this withdrawal carefully, knowing exactly what would happen when they left. The Thakari ambassador looked out his window at Council Station Alpha, watching maintenance crews struggle with systems they did not understand. The lights flickered as the power grid fluctuated again. In the distance, he could see cargo ships drifting in uncontrolled orbits because their navigation systems had failed. For the first time in his long career, Ambassador Krell wondered if his species had made a terrible mistake in taking human assistance for granted. The humans had never demanded gratitude or recognition for their contributions. They had simply done their jobs with quiet efficiency, while other species took credit for the results. Now, the galaxy was learning what happens when the people who actually know how to make things work decide to stop helping ungrateful clients. The worst part was the silence. Humans were not gloating or making threats. They had simply vanished, leaving behind a civilization that was slowly discovering it had never been as independent or capable as it believed. Admiral Threx watched his fleet die in the cold vacuum around Proxima Reach. The hegemony forces had come out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their ships moving with precision that spoke of careful planning and superior tactics. Within the first hour of battle, Threx had lost a third of his vessels and gained nothing in return. The Corvin admiral tried to remember the tactical briefings that General Kate Thompson had given during the joint military exercises. Kate had always emphasized the importance of flexible formations and rapid response protocols. She had warned that static defensive positions were death traps against an enemy who understood modern warfare. But Kate was gone, along with all her strategic innovations and tactical knowledge. The remaining Council military leaders had reverted to the traditional battle formations they had used before humans joined the Alliance. Ships arranged in neat geometric patterns, following predictable attack sequences that any competent enemy could counter with ease. Captain Steve Johnson had revolutionized space combat with his development of asymmetric warfare techniques. His methods had turned the Council fleet from a collection of individual ships into a coordinated instrument of destruction. But Steve had taken his knowledge with him when humanity departed, leaving behind officers who remembered the results, but not the principles. The hegemony commander was clearly using modified versions of human tactical doctrine. Their ships moved in irregular patterns that confused Council targeting systems. They concentrated overwhelming force at weak points in the defensive formation, then dispersed before the Council fleet could respond effectively. It was like watching students fight their former teachers. Admiral Threx realized with growing horror that the hegemony had been preparing for this moment for years. They had studied human military methods while pretending to maintain peaceful relations with the Council. Now they were using those same methods to destroy the force that had once protected the galaxy from their aggressive expansion. The battle lasted 6 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Council fleet. Only a handful of ships escaped to carry word of the disaster back to the core worlds. Admiral Threx was not among the survivors. His flagship exploded when hegemony forces targeted its human-designed power core with weapons that seemed specifically calibrated to exploit its weaknesses. The news of the military defeat reached Council Station Alpha just as the infrastructure crisis reached a critical point. Chairman Vex found himself dealing with multiple catastrophic failures simultaneously. The power grid was experiencing cascading blackouts. The water purification system had completely shut down. The artificial gravity was fluctuating so violently that entire sections of the station had to be evacuated. Chief Engineer Torven stood in the main control room and watched helplessly as system after system went offline. The diagnostic computers that Carlos Martinez had installed were flashing warning messages in human technical language that none of the remaining engineers could fully understand. The automated repair protocols required authorization codes that only Carlos had known. Dr. Rachel Stone had warned about exactly this kind of cascade failure in her infrastructure studies. The human systems engineer had written detailed reports about the dangers of integrated systems that could not be maintained independently. But her warnings had been dismissed as typical human overcaution. Now, her predictions were coming true with mathematical precision. Each system failure triggered problems in connected systems, creating an unstoppable wave of breakdowns throughout the station. The life support systems that had operated flawlessly for decades were shutting down one by one. On the planet Thakara Prime, Ambassador Krell watched hegemony dropships land outside his capital city. The planetary defense grid had failed 3 days earlier when the human-maintained orbital platforms went offline. The Thakari military had fought bravely, but their equipment was no match for the advanced weapons that the hegemony forces were using. Krell recognized some of the hegemony technology from intelligence reports he had seen years ago. Senator Linda Brooks had warned the Council about suspicious military buildups in hegemony space. She had presented evidence of secret weapons development and urged immediate defensive preparations. Krell had personally led the opposition to Linda's proposals. He had argued that the senator was exaggerating the threat to justify increased human military involvement in council affairs. The Thakari ambassador had convinced other representatives that humans were trying to manufacture a crisis to increase their own importance. Now Krell understood that Linda had been right about everything. The hegemony had been planning this invasion for years, waiting for the moment when human protection would no longer shield the Council worlds. They had timed their attack perfectly, striking just as the infrastructure failures reached critical levels. The refugee crisis exploded across the galaxy as billions fled the advancing hegemony forces. Entire populations abandoned their homeworlds and headed for the supposed safety of the core systems. But the transportation networks that should have managed such massive population movements had collapsed along with everything else. Dr. Paul Wright had developed sophisticated algorithms for refugee resettlement during previous crises. His mathematical models could predict optimal distribution patterns and prevent the overcrowding that led to humanitarian disasters. But Paul's work had been classified as proprietary human research and had left with the evacuation. The result was chaos on an unprecedented scale. Refugee ships arrived at already overcrowded stations with no facilities to accommodate them. Food and water shortages developed quickly. Disease spread through the packed refugee camps. Species that had lived in harmony for generations began fighting over limited resources. On Zentara Prime, the planetary government faced the impossible task of housing 3 million Thakari refugees with infrastructure that was already failing. Due to lack of human maintenance, the water treatment facilities could not handle the increased load. The power grid was overloaded. The medical facilities were overwhelmed by patients suffering from the ongoing plague. Dr. Vorth found himself treating patients in hospital corridors because there were no rooms available. The medical equipment that remained after the human evacuation was breaking down from overuse. Supplies of essential medicines were running low because the supply chains had collapsed. The Zentari scientists thought about Dr. Amy Rodriguez and her team of human medical researchers. Amy had developed emergency protocols for exactly this kind of crisis. Her disaster response plans had included detailed procedures for treating large numbers of patients with limited resources. Amy's protocols had required specialized equipment and drugs that were no longer available. Even worse, the protocols assumed a level of coordination between medical teams that no longer existed. The human doctors had somehow managed to organize complex treatment programs that involved dozens of specialists working in perfect harmony. Without human coordination, the medical response was fragmenting into dozens of separate efforts that often worked against each other. Corvan doctors used treatments that interfered with Centauri medications. Vakari medical procedures conflicted with standard council protocols. Patients were receiving contradictory treatments that sometimes made their conditions worse. The quantum communication network that connected the galaxy was breaking down as maintenance stations went offline. The network had been designed by human engineers who understood the delicate balance required to maintain quantum entanglement across interstellar distances. Without proper maintenance, the quantum links were decaying rapidly. Communication between worlds became sporadic and unreliable. Military commanders could not coordinate their defenses. Government officials lost contact with their colonies. Trade negotiations became impossible when merchants could not reliably contact their suppliers. Chairman Vex tried to hold the council together through a series of emergency meetings, but even the meetings themselves had become exercises in futility. The elegant conference systems that had allowed hundreds of representatives to participate smoothly in complex debates had relied on human-designed translation algorithms and moderation protocols. Without those systems, council sessions devolved into shouting matches between species who could barely understand each other. The careful diplomatic language that had allowed different cultures to communicate effectively had been developed by human linguists and cultural specialists. Now representatives were inadvertently insulting each other through mistranslations and cultural misunderstandings. The hegemony forces continued their advance through council space, encountering almost no effective resistance. The defensive strategies that had protected the galaxy for generations had been developed by human military theorists who understood how to coordinate the strengths of different species into an effective fighting force. Without human leadership, the council military had fragmented into separate species-based units that could not work together effectively. Corvan pilots flew aggressive attack patterns that left Centauri capital ships undefended. Vakari ground forces used tactics that conflicted with orbital bombardment strategies. Each species fought according to its own traditions, rather than following coordinated battle plans. Captain Roy Martinez had served alongside humans for 20 years before they vanished from council space. Now he commanded the scout ship Last Hope on a desperate mission to find them and beg for help. The ship was one of the few remaining vessels that could still navigate the deep space routes to the galactic rim, and Roy was one of the few non-human officers who had been trained in human exploration techniques. The mission had taken 6 months to organize, mainly because the Council intelligence services had finally managed to decode Agent Max Carter's final report. Max had been humanity's chief intelligence officer in Council space, and his last encrypted transmission had contained coordinates that pointed to a sector beyond the known galaxy. Roy remembered Max as a quiet man who had always seemed to know more than he was saying. The human agent had filed regular reports about hegemony, military activities, and political developments throughout Council space, but his final message had been different. It had contained star charts and navigation data that suggested humans had been planning their exodus for years, that the coordinates led to a region of space that Council astronomers had always assumed was empty. Long-range sensors had detected no signs of habitation or industrial activity. But as the Last Hope approached the designated coordinates, Roy's instruments began picking up energy signatures that defied explanation. The first sign was a quantum beacon that appeared on their screens when they were still 3 light hours away from the target system. The beacon was broadcasting a simple message in multiple languages. Unknown vessels will be escorted to Border Station 7 for processing. Do not deviate from the provided flight path. Welcome to Human Federation space. Roy felt his heart skip a beat. Human Federation space. The humans had not just left Council territory. They had established their own government and claimed an entire region of the galaxy for themselves. The scope of what they had accomplished in just 2 years was staggering. The escort arrived before Roy could fully process the implications. It was a single ship, sleek and elegant, in a way that made the Last Hope look like a primitive cargo hauler. The vessel appeared on their screens without triggering any of the proximity alarms, suggesting stealth technology far beyond anything the Council possessed. Commander Janet. Lee's voice came over the communication system with the crisp professionalism that Roy remembered from their days serving together in the Joint Defense Force. But there was something different in her tone now. A confidence and authority that had not been there before. Captain Martinez, this is Commander Lee of the Federation Border Guard. Please follow our navigation beacon to Border Station 7. Any deviation from the assigned flight path will result in immediate escort back to Council space. Roy tried to establish a more personal connection. Janet, it's good to hear your voice again. We need to talk about what's happening in Council space. The situation is desperate. There was a pause before Janet responded. Captain, all diplomatic. Communications will be handled through proper channels at the border station. Please maintain radio silence until you reach your destination. The flight to Border Station 7 took 2 hours, and every minute of it filled Roy with growing amazement. The space around the border station was filled with human ships of designs he had never seen before. Massive cargo vessels that dwarfed anything in the Council fleet. Sleek warships that moved with predatory grace. Construction platforms working on projects that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Border Station 7 itself was a marvel of engineering that made Council Station Alpha look like a primitive outpost. The structure rotated slowly in the void, generating its own gravity through centrifugal force. Solar collection arrays that could power entire planets fed energy into systems that hummed with barely contained power dot as the Last Hope docked with the station. Roy caught glimpses through the viewports of the interior. The corridors were spacious and bright, filled with humans wearing uniforms he did not recognize. Children ran through play areas, while their parents worked at tasks that seemed routine but involved technology Roy could not identify. Commander. Janet Lee met them at the airlock, wearing the uniform of the Human Federation Border Guard. She looked exactly the same as Roy remembered, but she carried herself with a new sense of purpose. Behind her stood 2 other humans in different uniforms, suggesting a complex military and civilian command structure. Captain Martinez, Janet said formally, I am authorized to receive your diplomatic delegation and arrange appropriate meetings with Federation officials. However, I should warn you that the Federation operates under different protocols than the Council. Our time is valuable, and we do not engage in extended negotiations without clear objectives. Roy introduced his small team of Council representatives. Ambassador Krell had insisted on coming personally, despite his advanced age and the dangers of deep space travel. Chairman Vex had sent his personal aide, a young Zentari named Kosh, who had been selected for his knowledge of human customs. Dr. Vorth had volunteered to join the mission in hopes of learning about human medical advances. Janet led them through the station to a conference room that was both familiar and alien. The basic layout was similar to Council meeting spaces, but the technology was clearly generations ahead of anything Roy had seen. The walls displayed star charts that showed the extent of Human Federation territory, and Roy was shocked to see that it covered nearly a quarter of the galaxy. The first revelation came when Dr. Alex Hayes entered the room. Roy remembered Alex as the quiet head of human medical research who had worked closely with alien scientists on joint projects. But the man who sat down across from them wore the uniform of a Federation department head and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Gentlemen, Alex said without preamble, I understand you are here to discuss the current situation in former Council space. Before we begin, I should clarify something about human medical capabilities that may not have been apparent during our previous cooperation. Alex activated a holographic display that showed comparative medical statistics. During our time in council space, human medical teams operated under strict limitations designed to avoid revealing the full extent of our capabilities. We provided treatments that were effective, but not significantly advanced beyond what your own researchers could theoretically develop. Dr. Vorth leaned forward in shock. Are you saying that you are deliberately holding back your medical knowledge? Alex nodded calmly. Of course. Our actual medical technology is approximately 3 centuries ahead of current council capabilities. We eliminated most diseases, including aging, from human populations over 200 years ago. The treatments we shared with the council were essentially simplified versions of our basic emergency protocols. The implications hit Dr. Vorth like a physical blow. The medical advances that had revolutionized council healthcare and saved millions of lives had been nothing more than basic first aid from humanity's perspective. The research that alien scientists had considered breakthrough discoveries had been routine applications of technologies that humans had mastered centuries ago. Chairman Vex's aide, Kosh, asked the question that was burning in everyone's mind. If your technology is so advanced, why did you stay in council space? Why did you pretend to be our equals instead of our superiors? Dr. Alex Hayes exchanged glances with Commander Lee before answering. That question will be addressed by someone with higher authority than myself. But I can tell you that humanity has never viewed other species as inferiors. We remained in council space because we believed in the potential for genuine cooperation between equals. Another human entered the room, wearing a uniform that Roy did not recognize, but which clearly indicated very high rank. The man was older than the others, with gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected entire civilizations. I am Director Sam Turner, head of the Federation Department of Galactic Affairs, the man said as he took his seat. I have been authorized to provide you with certain information about humanity's actual capabilities and our reasons for leaving council space. Director Turner activated a more comprehensive holographic display that showed the true extent of human civilization. The images revealed massive orbital installations around dozens of star systems, ring worlds under construction around entire stars, industrial platforms that dwarfed planets, fleet yards building ships of impossible size and complexity. Humanity achieved interstellar travel over 500 years ago, Turner explained matter-of-factly. We have maintained a presence in this galaxy for 3 centuries. Our involvement with the Council was part of a long-term cultural development program designed to help younger species achieve their potential. Ambassador Krell found his voice. At last, you were studying us, like laboratory specimens. Turner shook his head. Not studying, teaching, guiding, protecting. We hoped that by working alongside your species as apparent equals, we could help you develop the wisdom and cooperation necessary for true galactic civilization. We shared our knowledge freely, but carefully, to avoid creating dependency. The terrible truth was becoming clear. Humanity had never been members of the Council in any meaningful sense. 3 years had passed since humanity's silent departure, and the galaxy bore scars that would take generations to heal. Ambassador Krell stood before the observation window of Border Station 7 and watched the steady stream of refugee ships arriving at the edge of human Federation space. Each vessel carried the survivors of worlds that had fallen to the hegemony or collapsed under the weight of infrastructural failure. The Galactic Council no longer existed as a functioning government. Its territory had been reduced to a handful of core systems that managed to maintain basic life support through careful rationing and primitive technology. The elegant civilization that had once spanned thousands of worlds had crumbled into scattered fragments, each struggling to survive in isolation. Chairman Vex stood beside Krell, his crystalline structure dim with exhaustion and malnutrition. The former council leader had aged decades in the past 3 years, his once proud bearing reduced to the hunched posture of a refugee seeking charity. In his hands, he carried the formal documents that represented the council's complete surrender, an official apology, and a desperate plea for Federation assistance. Dr. Vorth completed their small delegation, representing the medical and scientific communities that had once considered themselves humanity's equals. The Zentari scientist had spent the journey to Federation space, composing detailed reports about the plagues and infrastructure failures that were killing billions across the former council territory. He hoped that human compassion would overcome human judgment, but he was no longer confident about anything. Commander Janet Lee received them in the same conference room where they had first learned the truth about humanity's capabilities. But this time, she was not alone. Behind her stood Director Sam Turner and several other Federation officials whose titles and functions remained mysterious to the alien delegation. Janet's greeting was professionally polite, but carried no warmth. Ambassador Krell, Chairman Vex, Dr. Vorth, the Federation has reviewed your request for emergency assistance and humanitarian intervention. Director Turner will present our response. Turner activated the holographic display system that had become familiar to the council representatives during their previous visits. The images showed the current state of former council space in devastating detail. Worlds stripped of their populations, space stations drifting powerless in the void, trade routes abandoned to pirates and scavengers. The Federation has maintained comprehensive monitoring of the situation in your former territory, Turner said without emotion. Our intelligence networks report that approximately 4 billion sentient beings have died from war, disease, and infrastructure collapse since our departure. Another 12 billion have been displaced from their homeworlds and are living as refugees in substandard conditions. The numbers hit the council delegation like physical blows. Krell had suspected that the casualties were severe, but hearing the actual statistics made the scope of the disaster real in a way that individual reports could not. 16 billion lives destroyed because the council had been too proud to appreciate the help they were receiving. Turner continued his presentation with the dispassionate tone of someone delivering a technical briefing. The hegemony currently controls 63% of former council space and appears to be consolidating their conquest rather than pursuing further expansion. Their military uses modified versions of human tactical doctrine, suggesting that they prepared for this conflict for years while maintaining diplomatic relations with the council. Dr. Vorth found his voice long enough to ask the question that had been haunting him. Did you know this would happen? Did humanity plan for the council to collapse when you left? Turner's expression softened slightly, showing the first hint of emotion since the meeting began. Dr. Vorth, we knew that council civilization was dependent on human support in ways that most aliens did not understand. We hoped that gradual withdrawal might encourage greater self-reliance without causing total collapse. But your species' reaction to our departure was more hostile than we anticipated. The director called up historical records showing the council's response to humanity's evacuation. Angry denunciations of human selfishness and betrayal. Accusations that humans were abandoning their responsibilities. Demands that they return immediately to resume their support roles. We had planned to maintain limited contact and provide emergency assistance during your transition to independence, Turner explained. But council leadership made it clear that you viewed our departure as a personal insult rather than an opportunity for growth. Under those circumstances, any continued involvement would have simply prolonged your dependency. Chairman Vex spoke for the first time since entering the room. We understand now that we made terrible mistakes. We took your help for granted and dismissed your warnings. But surely the scale of the current disaster justifies emergency intervention. Billions of innocent people are suffering for the arrogance of their leaders. Turner nodded slowly. The Federation is genuinely sorry for the suffering that has occurred. We take no pleasure in seeing the consequences of your choices. However, we learned from our previous experience that assuming responsibility for other species' welfare ultimately harms both parties. The director stood and walked to the observation window, looking out at the refugee ships that continued to arrive in Federation space. Every day, we receive thousands of requests for assistance from former Council worlds. Medical aid, technical support, military protection, economic assistance. All of the help that we provided quietly for decades, now being requested explicitly. He turned back to face the Council delegation. The Federation has decided to offer a single choice to the survivors of Council civilization. We will accept refugees who are willing to acknowledge their species, limitations, and begin the long process of genuine education under human guidance. These individuals will become citizens of the Federation with full rights and protections. Ambassador, Krell felt a surge of hope for the first time in months. What about those who choose to remain in Council space? Will you provide any assistance to help them rebuild? Turner's expression became cold again. Those who choose to remain in their current territories will receive no assistance from the Federation. They will be free to attempt rebuilding their civilization using only their own resources and capabilities. We will not interfere with their efforts, but neither will we subsidize their continued independence. The terms were harsh but fair. Humanity was offering to take responsibility for any alien willing to admit their need for guidance and accept the role of student rather than equal partner. But those too proud to acknowledge their limitations would be left to face the consequences of their choices without any safety net. Dr. Vorth realized that this was exactly the same choice that had been offered implicitly for decades while humans served in Council space. The difference was that now the choice was being made explicit with clear consequences for each option. How many aliens have chosen to join the Federation? Vorth asked. Commander Lee answered this time. Approximately 800 million individuals from various species have applied for Federation citizenship. Most are scientists, engineers, medical personnel, and other specialists who worked closely with humans and understand the benefits of genuine cooperation. The number was both encouraging and devastating. 800 million people represented a significant portion of the surviving population, but it also meant that billions more were choosing to struggle alone rather than admit their need for help. Turner returned to his seat and activated a new display showing Federation expansion plans. The Federation is not remaining static while former Council space struggles with its problems. We are actively expanding into unexplored regions of the galaxy, making contact with new species and evaluating their potential for cooperation. The images showed massive exploration fleets moving toward distant galaxies, their ships equipped with technology that made even current Federation vessels look primitive. Humanity was not waiting for the Council species to mature. They were moving on to find partners who might be more receptive to genuine cooperation. We have made contact with 17 species in the Andromeda Galaxy who show promising signs of collaborative potential, Turner continued. Unlike Council species, they appear genuinely interested in learning from more advanced civilizations rather than competing with them. The implications were clear. Humanity had learned from their experience with the Council and was applying those lessons to new relationships. They would not repeat the mistake of pretending to be equals with species who were clearly still developing. Future partnerships would be based on honest acknowledgement of capabilities and limitations. Admiral Jake Morrison entered the conference room, wearing the uniform of the Federation Exploration Command. Roy Martinez recognized him immediately as the captain who had overseen the final evacuation of human personnel from Council space. But Jake's new rank and bearing suggested that the evacuation had been just the beginning of his career, not the end. Director Turler, Jake said formally, the council representatives should be informed about our long-term plans for former council space. They have a right to know what humanity intends for the region they once governed.